Well, my first question is, what is vendor compliance?
Hi, Dustin. Yes, it's Norman Keffs, and I'm happy to be interviewed again by you. It's a pleasure to be back. So, vendor compliance. What is vendor compliance? Well, you know that I look at vendor compliance, and I define vendor compliance, I think, as internal controls for external relationships. Vendor compliance being internal controls for external relationships, these have to be written down. Vendor compliance is an agreement or a contract, and those are legal terms which have to be flushed out between a company, a buying company, a customer enterprise, and its suppliers of goods and services. And pretty much when I consult for companies, we're considering suppliers that provide goods, not so much services. These are legally binding, this is a legally binding document of rules and requirements of engagement covering technical, operational, legal, and ethical aspects of the buyer-seller relationship. So again, very important that this is written down, and I consider vendor compliance to be the internal controls for external relationships.
Why is vendor compliance important?
So why is this important? Well, for customers, vendor compliance brings efficiency across the supply chain trading partners through uniformity. Retailers, for example, will have thousands, if not maybe 10,000 different companies that are selling products to them, and it simply is not possible for all of the vendors, to have different barcodes, have different size cartons, different weights, submit all of their invoices differently, to be communicated with differently. So the customer entity, the buying entity, whether it's a retailer or a pharmaceutical distributor or a manufacturer such as an automobile manufacturer or a grocery store, they need all of their suppliers to conform to certain requirements for uniformity's sake. For suppliers, yes, this is a cost burden of doing business, but they should look at it as an advantage. It's a learning opportunity. It's a chance to say, well, you know what, if we are being forced to receive purchase orders electronically for one customer, maybe we can take advantage of this and streamline our internal operations. If we have to barcode label our products and our cartons, maybe we should look at introducing barcoding to increase our throughput. It's a chance to leverage this technology internally, gain a competitive advantage operationally, and from a data analysis perspective on who the supplier is competing with. So the supplier should not begrudge necessarily having to conform, because in a competitive world, the smart supplier will take advantage of what they're being looked at doing and say, how can we utilize what we have to do strategically into our company plan in order to better position ourselves.
Can you talk about how it's done effectively?
And unfortunately, Dustin, I have typically not seen vendor compliance done very effectively at all. In fact, it's typically done very ineffectively because vendor compliance is typically ill-conceived and poorly communicated, which only frustrates the suppliers and the customer entity staff. And this is because vendor compliance requirements sometimes conflict with themselves. It's because the supplier, the vendor, may be trying to get an answer on something, and the customer entity doesn't provide a phone number, or the staff is too difficult to reach, or you can only email, and emails go unanswered for days, or you can only communicate through a portal, and the portal is not even, that the portal responses are not even answered, like within the United States. Or the vendor gets two different answers depending on who they ask at the customer entity. And so frustrations flare on both ends. There are delays in taking supply chain actions. And so there's a lot of tension and mistrust. And this also comes into play when chargebacks are involved, when chargebacks are excessively assessed or aggressively assigned. And this just creates a lot more tension between the customer and the vendor community. The customer and its vendors are supposed to be trading partners, not trading adversaries. And the customer entity has to realize that suppliers have as much value as customers and need to be treated as such. I have yet to find the customer entity that is 100% perfect in everything that they do. But the expectation is the vendors will be 100% perfect. And this is no way to start a relationship, not personally and not professionally. But this is how many supply chain relationships are expected to exist. And in the United States, we have the legal system is based on innocence before the presumption of guilt. And in too many supply chain relationships, it's guilt before you prove yourself innocent, and even if you can, and then even if you do prove yourself innocent, we're still going to assess you as guilty anyway. And this is why too many supply chain relationships are just not healthy in.
And where have you seen success?
So. As far as successes go, I've really only seen one or two companies come close to getting their vendor compliance acceptable. Even though I've seen a lot of vendor compliance documentation and websites in my over 20 years of vendor compliance experience, and yet I'm sure that there are many companies that are patting themselves on the back for their vendor compliance documentation and vendor compliance portals, but they are, and I will use the term, horrible, dysfunctional, and not written to their audience. And when you do vendor compliance documentation, whether it's a Word document, something that goes into PDF form, whether it's a website, when you write to your audience, remember that you are writing for your vendors and for your internal audience, which comprises employees that may not be familiar with what you're writing about. And employees leave, new employees come in. And so you have to be very, very careful about writing to your audiences internally and externally. And I have only seen very, very poor jobs of that.
And my last question is, can you please provide a brief background of yourself?
My background on this, I think I have a very unique perspective of vendor compliance in my 30-year career, which includes software development, business and operations analysis, and systems analysis. I've been involved in supply chain vendor compliance since 1993, with expertise in ERP systems, electronic data interchange, and barcode labeling and scanning applications. My vendor compliance experience is mostly in retail, but also in pharmaceutical industry, electronics, the publishing industry, and the marine industry. I did spend 4 years as the supply chain consultant to the largest marine industry trade association in the United States. And I also developed a unique 6-part supplier education course while consulting for the Retail Industries Trade Association prior to its merger with GS1 US. I have consulted, I've been consulting for 20 years, and I have helped a number of companies from a vendor compliance standpoint, from both a technical aspect and operational aspect, comply with the mandates of their top-level customers, as well as help some companies create downstream vendor compliance documentation for their downstream supply chains. I have a book that is being published in January of 2016 called Successful Supply Chain Vendor Compliance. It is the only book that I can find on the topic of supply chain vendor compliance, and I felt that with my over 20 years of experience in supply chain vendor compliance, technically and operationally, with some of the unique experiences I've had, that somebody had to write the book, and that I was a good person to do it. So that is my experience, my expertise in supply chain vendor compliance. And Dustin, I just want to thank you again for